So welcome. I am Sarah Stewart. I am the Extension and Events Coordinator for Organic BC. I'm super excited to bring you this series today. It's something I've been working on for the last year. And I think the first thing I'd like to do is just to let everyone know it's been generously funded by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada through the BC Climate Agri-Solutions Fund, which is delivered by the Investment Agriculture Foundation of BC. So the next thing I'd like to do is just to start by recognizing that we're hosting this session on all of the unceded and sovereign Indigenous territories across the province, known colonially as British Columbia, and this country known colonially as Canada. I'm currently hosting as an uninvited guest on the territories of the Leewat and the Statliam nations, and I would like to acknowledge the rights of the First Peoples to these lands that they should technically have. This video series was filmed in the unceded territories of the Treaty 8 First Nations, the Doig River First Nations, the Blueberry River First Nation, Halfway River First Nation, also on the lands of the Silks Okanagan people and the Stolo peoples of the Chim First Nation. Okay, so a bit more of a background. In the summer of 2023, I traveled to 3 different parts of the region of the province. The 3 sort of larger agricultural areas of the province, the Peace Valley, the Lower Mainland, and the Okanagan, and caught up with different either researchers or farmers that were trialing innovative cover cropping practices. Filmed them, and they were very lovely and helpful in allowing me to stick a camera in their face and ask them multiple questions. And then the result is this video series. So basically the format will be, I will play the videos, the 3 videos, and at the end of each video, there'll be a chance for questions to the different farmers or researchers that were part of the said video that we're showing. You can put your questions in the chat if you like, or you can just wait until the time comes and put your hand up and verbally ask a question to those people. I am just going to launch a really quick poll sorry. Having a multiple screen malfunction here. Here we go. Just to the participants, it's 3 questions. If you can just answer those questions, that would be amazing. And before we get started, that just helps us with our demographics recording. Perfect. Okay. And without further ado, I am going to show the first video of the Peace region. And that was a video where the first place I visited was the North Peace Research Association, and spoke to one of the research scientists there about the work that they're doing and the trials that they're doing. And then from there, we moved to SR Ranch, which Jed Franklin is here tonight to answer questions about his cover cropping practices. And then we went to visit the Noble family at Jackknife Creek Ranch Land and Cattle about their swath grazing practices. So yeah, let me get started there. I'm just going to stop it very quickly. I just want to get a heads up from people that you're actually seeing it on the screen as it is meant to be, and you're also hearing sound, okay?
Yeah, it's coming through.
Perfect, thank you. Wonderful. Enjoy. On Organic BC's cover cropping tour of British Columbia, we started at the North Peace Applied Research Association to explore their ongoing trials around cover cropping. We then visited a few producers in the region to witness firsthand the implementation of these practices, as well as to view some other innovative techniques.
Well, my name is Maria Angelica Ouellet, and I am the research coordinator at the North Peace Applied Research Association. Its goal is to take a lot of research trials in order to answer some of the interrogatives that a lot of producers have and a lot of practices that the producers have heard in the past or from other sites, and they would like to apply it to their farms today.
The North Peace Applied Research Association would like to see more ground covered in the region. They would also like to see a reduction in the use of herbicides and pesticides. They conduct various cover cropping trials, such as assessing the nutritional value of forage mixes, testing the water infiltration properties of deep-rooted cover crops, the viability of relay cropping, as well as trials based around cover crops used as a weed suppressant. However, we focused on two particular trials: a legume intercropping trial, which measures how yields are affected when a legume is intercropped between a cash crop cereal, and an annual clover trial aimed at understanding how best to establish a living soil cover while a cash crop is growing.
You could see a little bit of intercropping for forage around here, but you don't see a cover underneath those main crops. And what if we were to have, say, I don't know, a little bit of rye, a little bit of hairy veg? Maybe you wouldn't need as many herbicides as you do now. Maybe you wouldn't need as many pesticides as you do now. So it is something that we can play with. It is something that we can search if it works or not. And that is something that we can show to growers and say, you know, this is something we have tried. Why don't you try it out? Growers here, they generally like to use clovers because they stay low in the soil. Doesn't affect their harvesting. And also oats and barley as part of their cover. That is something that they can also harvest for, mostly for forage. In terms of intercrops, the piola, as I mentioned before, so canola and peas is a very successful intercrop that is being used. The intercropping of, say, either barley or wheat with a legume, such as peas, is quite useful for forage. It increases the value of forage for growers around this area. It's about how can we provide a living mat of cover to the soil while we are running main crop harvesting and growth. So the way we tried to set that up, we wanted to grow 3 different types of clover, so white clover, sweet clover if I'm not mistaken, and crimson clover. And we wanted to see if it was the species affecting the end credit to the main crop, number one, and how would that differ should they be grown either as an intercrop with the main crop or broadcasted along the plot. The main crops that we selected were wheat and canola. You could probably say that intercropping would be better than broadcasting already. We have already seen that in the field. I mean, for broadcasting, you need to either apply a lot of seed and you need a lot of water the day after. So we have seen that with the broadcasting plots, it's a little bit iffy. You need to grow it with a seeder. The seed needs to have that depth and the contact with the soil, and it needs to be covered in order for it to come out.
The North Peace Applied Research Association trials go on, and they continue to do the good work as the land guinea pig, as Angelica puts it, for producers in the region. Now it's time to see what some of those growers are putting into practice.
My name is Jed Franklin. We have a small grain farm up in Peace River country. Here we have 6 quarters and about 800 plus or minus acres that we seed every spring. What kind of cover crops can you do and what has been successful? It's a big question, but it's a simple answer now. I have experimented with everything from buckwheat and Sudan grass and rye and berseem clover and subterranean clover and sun hemp and sunflowers and mixes and tillage radish and beets and purple top turnips and a long and extensive list. I like playing with things and seeing what works. But I found that the annual cover crops are at high risk of not doing well. So if you seed it in the spring, you got a good chance that there's going to be trouble, especially it seems like the climate is becoming more extreme. When it's wet, it's wet. And when it's dry, it's really dry for longer periods of time. When I was a kid, we used to get a rain every 3 or 4 or 5 days. It was pretty normal over the whole summer, and now it's like the weather patterns get stuck in a loop. Like, you remember the heat dome we had a few years back? This year we're in a level 4 drought. Things are becoming more extreme. The plants needing to become more resilient as well. And when you spring seed something, it may be too wet or it may be dry enough and then it get too wet. If it's small and tender, it's easily damaged or destroyed. So I have gone away from spring seeded cover crops into interseeded cover crops, meaning that when I seed my oats in the spring, I also seed sweet clover and red clover with them, or alfalfa. Alfalfa is a perennial that lasts for longer periods in the field. So alfalfa is when I need more time between cultivations. So if I have a weed that's being particularly tenacious, I may actually summer fallow the field or put it into a longer cover crop after that to try to rebuild the damage that I did with the summer fallow. So here's an oat crop that doesn't look too bad right now, actually. There is some moisture in the ground, but we go down a little ways and it's starting to get, there's some, thankfully there's some. And then this little guy right here, I don't know if you can see that thing, but that little guy right there is an alfalfa plant. So this crop is underseeded to alfalfa. So we have oats growing on the top. Because they're an annual, they'll grow fast. And the alfalfa, the first year, is weak, stunted, small, and slow. So this alfalfa won't get any taller than ankle high, maybe up as high as the oats are. But these oats, as long as we have water, these oats will be a meter high at least at harvest time. And we'll come through with a combine and harvest all of the oats, put them in the bin, and behind the combine you'll see all the little alfalfa plants growing up through the straw. And next year we will have, hopefully, a good alfalfa stand on the field. Red clover really likes being wet. And if we get a year that's just this terrific deluge and it's wet, there's puddles in the field, red clover will survive and it will do well. And if we have a dry year, the sweet clover, it'll grow in a gravel pit. It's what you see growing alongside the highway in the gravel, the big yellow blossom flowered. You wouldn't recognize it as clover if you knew clover plants well, but it's nitrogen. Both are nitrogen fixing, both produce lots of vegetation, and both are cheap to seed. Both are really easy to seed, and they catch with the crop. Over here is red clover. I know it's pink, but trust me, it's red clover. And up here, you can see how it's getting pretty tall. It's almost to my shoulder. And then this will fall down in a big rain. But it has these thick stems. Well, here's one right here. These are those coarse stems that I was talking. When they dry out, it's hard to pull a plow through. You get enough of them pulling, and it'll stop even my big tractor if there's several thousand of them. But this is a great cover crop. And then the next plant over here that you should take note of is alfalfa. And that's these ones right here. It's also a great nitrogen fixer and lots of organic material. This is what I'm looking to see when I'm planting a cover crop. I don't want to see any soil, and I want to see it at least 3 or 4 feet tall. Anything less than that is not a successful cover crop as far as I'm concerned. Tillage radish is great for breaking up the hard pan in the ground, or bringing up phosphorus, or converting elemental phosphorus to P2O5. All of these are great benefits. But for putting in organic matter as a cover crop, and that's one of the primary purposes, you want tons per acre, just lots and lots and lots of it. And this is why I've gone back to this. When I do an annual seeded crop, it's knee high. I can see dirt through the crop. It would take 10 of them to produce the same tons per acre as one crop of this. And this seed is not expensive. The sweet clover seed, maybe 4 pounds an acre at $3 a pound. That's not expensive. And the red clover, about the same price and about the same rate. So I end up with 6-8 pounds an acre total. That's plenty. This right here is yellow blossom sweet clover. You can tell it's about at my head. But if you look out a little bit further, those are like higher than my hand out there. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there's just a steady hum in it. And that's all the wild bees and honeybees and all sorts of things in here making seed, getting nectar, doing their thing. And healthy insects are a good sign on the farm. The habitat is tremendous. All the deer and the elk and the moose, they all come to have their babies in the sweet clover. It's like a corn maze. To me, part of cover cropping is actually enjoying it. Like it's that stress-free year that your land gets to rest and you get to rest, and you get a smile on your face when you see the animals out in there. And it's playing tag, playing hide and seek in the field with your kids when the sweet clover's over your head. That's a memory you just can't take away. So if you haven't tried cover cropping, try it for fun, not because the world is dying and you need to address climate change, not because you don't want to buy fertilizer, not because, add all those things too, but do it because it's a joy.
At Jackknife Creek Ranch in Manning, Alberta, the Polovich family is implementing innovative cover cropping practices, specifically swath grazing, in their cattle operation. This approach ensures that their cows are well fed throughout the winter, while simultaneously enhancing soil health and bolstering the overall resilience of their land, livestock, and their entire operation.
I'm Nora Polovich, and the name of our farm is Jackknife Creek Land and Cattle Corp. And
my name is Jolene Noble, and I'm Nora's daughter. On the farm, we also have my dad, Bob Noble, and then my brother, Lee Noble.
We're a mixed operation, cattle, grass seed, and grain cash cropping.
So on our farm, we have a May calving cow herd, and so about the 25th of April, May 1st is our trigger date, and so we are calving out on pasture. We have quite a bit of smooth brome sod here at the farm that we also bale graze on for instead of fertilizing it, and so primarily grass pasture for May and the start of June. And then as our higher legume pastures in our summer pastures get to the stage that we can put cows out on, we are trailing cows out to those as well. So the cows are on that perennial pasture depending on the year into September and October. We are cognizant of leaving some stockpile for the next year as well. And when the plain and nutrition starts to decline in the fall is when we move the pairs onto swath grazing. And so we'll be swath grazing at least by October 15th, and we'll continue swath grazing into February with pairs.
Swath grazing is the practice of seeding a cover crop mix, typically comprising of annual forages and cereals from mid-May to early June. Subsequently, it is cut down and formed into windrows or swathed from late August to mid-September, just before the arrival of killing frosts. These swaths are then left in the field for cattle to graze during the winter, even beneath the snow, thereby extending the grazing season. This practice not only preserves the nutrients from manure and urine on the fields, but also reduces labour, all the while promoting increased soil health.
We seed 9 different species in end of May, June, and swath that in late August, September, and then we swath graze that through the winter, and that has become a major feed source for us. We're leaving our calves on longer now into February, and weaning them after that, and find that they are doing remarkably well. We've been doing feed testing and very high planting nutrition on those cover crop swaths. So this is a cover crop that was seeded end of May, and we will be swathing it for winter grazing probably end of August, early September, depending on moisture. And Jolene's just going to point out all the different species. I think this is a nine-way mix, right?
9-way mix.
Yeah.
Some of the species that we have in here are definitely in smaller proportions, so we might not see them everywhere in the field, especially with the dry conditions. Not everything comes up each year. So our main ones that we do want to see are definitely the oats and peas. Hairy vetch and our brassicas make up the bulk of it. So when we're looking at something like this, of course, our forage peas, the big difference with this and a field pea is just the size of the leaves and the fact that this will stay about a foot taller than the oats. So if we get 5 foot tall oats, we'll get 6 foot tall peas. Just seems to be like that every year. And then of course we go with a forage oat. This is haymakers. Just the size of the leaf is really important to us, and we find that it's not as stocky as some of the others. When we get down into the canopy is when we start to see the other stuff. So these little guys, this is Goliath forage brassica. It's a hybrid out of PGG. All the small seed and actually the forage peas come from Union Forage, and so these guys will really bring a lot of feed value as well as a lot of bulk. They're deceiving right now, but they will pop up higher in the canopy as the season goes on. And then over here we see some of those hairy vetch plants. All the small seed starts off a little bit behind the cereal and the peas, and you'll notice by usually the middle of August this will pop up and you'll start to see a purple tinge to the field as it blooms. So it'll come up above the rest of them. Okay, so down in here, this is actually a chicory plant that is a volunteer. It would have been seeded 4 or 5 years ago, and it just keeps coming back, so we're not upset about that at all. But when you look down in here, this is another brassica that we seed. It is a Hunter, and it is a turnip cross. It's a hybrid out of PGG once again. The reason why we use the 2 different ones is if we do get any regrowth, because we cut the end of August, start of September. If we get some warm days after that, even after a killing frost, these guys will come back. Completely basal growth habits, so if you cut it off here, there's still enough leaf for photosynthesis and regrowth, whereas our Goliath has a thick stem, and so we won't get the regrowth out of it. Down in here, that would be an Italian ryegrass. It's in there at a fairly low rate just because we're not looking at it for bulk and forage. We'll get regrowth out of it for sure, but it's more diversity as another C3 grass. And then
Sunflower.
in here we have one of our sunflowers. The grasshoppers have kind of worked it over a little bit, but these guys will bloom the very end of August, usually about 2 days before we cut them, which is a little disappointing not to see them a little bit earlier, but all depends. Sometimes we get them for a week before they get cut down.
We had tried swath grazing earlier using just a monocrop, just oats, and we found that lots of times we'd get an early snowfall in October, and then it would warm up, and then it would freeze those swaths right down to the ground, and the cows had a really hard time getting it. And then we switched to the multi-species cover crop and for swath grazing, and we found that the swaths would sit quite high because of all the different species interlocking, and the swaths would be nice and airy so that there would be movement. And even though the 1 year we swathed, it was extremely wet and we were worried it was just going to turn slimy, it didn't, because there was air movement and those swaths stayed nice and fluffy. And we find even when we get a lot of snow that those swaths don't, they still keep the height on them. They don't get squashed down like a monocrop does, and the cows can easily find those swaths and they dig through them. And yeah, the different species just keep those swaths nice and light and fluffy and high off the ground, and it makes a huge difference.
And the blend in particular is also more palatable to cows than just straight oats. So they are okay with doing a bit of extra work to get to it. Whereas sometimes if it's a bit of extra work just to get to oats, they're not a big fan and they'll stand at the corner and they don't want to go back out. So you do lose gains forcing those cows to go after that feed. And it is a more balanced feed. It's definitely a higher protein feed, and it does have a spike in energy compared to straight cereal. And we really need that to leave the calves on the cows. And we found that leaving the calves on the cows and weaning later has led to a huge reduction in illness in the backgrounding lot. So our instance of bloat and pneumonia is completely wiped out, essentially.
Yeah,
and we definitely struggled with that with the younger calves when we were traditionally weaning in November. So that's been a huge help as well. And our calves, the gains on them over the winter being on the cow and on the swaths is quite fantastic. But
Yeah.
one of the biggest things actually with the change that we've made in leaving the calves on the cows is everything is fed by moving one wire. Everything on the farm, other than the bulls, is fed all at once. And so that's a huge time saver as well. You're not feeding a pen of older cows, a pen of younger cows, and then your pen of backgrounders. You're feeding everything all at once. And we've been quite impressed with our young cows, how they've been able to finish growing, raise a calf that's still milking for a calf,
And rebreed.
and bring that second pregnancy to full term. They've done remarkably well, and we have not noticed a spike in open rates. So adding the cover crop swath grazing has really added resiliency to our farm in a couple different aspects. One of the big ones we've found is that it spreads out our risk. We're having, it's not uncommon to have a dry spell, and when that dry spell comes in May and the first half of June, your hay crops really do suffer, and your perennial pastures suffer as well. So if we don't get rain in the first half of the season, yes, our cover crops that are planted the end of May won't look so good for the first bit, but they can take up that moisture in July and August, and we can still get an extremely good crop. At that point, we only take one hay cutting, so our perennial hay crop is kind of over and done for the year. And if that's all that we relied on, we would be in a really bad place for winter feed. That being said, it's the same thing. If we get early spring moisture, our hay crop looks fantastic, and if we get really dry in July and August, our cover crop doesn't look as good. But that just kind of spreads out our risks so that at least one of our feed sources can take advantage no matter when we get moisture.
And we've found the cover cropping for swath grazing has been so beneficial to our operation. We also feel it is being very beneficial to our soil too, that diversity above ground is promoting diversity below ground, and we're definitely seeing an improvement in the health of our soils.
I believe that quite possibly that Jolene's mother, Nora, has joined us as well, so she's probably available for questions too. I might put a spotlight on you guys so that you can be seen. There we go. And Jed. Right. Excellent. Does anyone have any questions? They can either put them in the chat or just open up your mic and ask. And if they don't,
I've got a question.
go ahead.
I'm Natalie. My husband is Jeff. We are new entrants into rotational grazing in the Okanagan, and so in British Columbia. So your cover cropping isn't something that we're immediately thinking of, but the question was, it sounds like you hay, or you said you have a perennial hay crop. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so you don't seed that at all. You just interseed the cover crop so that after you've hayed, your cover crop comes up there.
Different fields. So
Okay.
We
Oh, Jolene, we're losing you.
have a fairly short growing season compared to you guys as well. Our main annual crops are seeded in May and early June to avoid
The killer frost.
Is that any better?
Yeah.
It's in and out. You're coming back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I shut off my video, so hopefully that helps.
Okay.
It's separate fields. So we have perennial hay stands, so alfalfa grass mix primarily, and that we use for hay stand, and that's what we rely on for feed February to May.
Mhm.
And other fields we have our annual swath grazing on. And so
Okay.
there's separate fields. Our season, quite honestly, is too short for relay cropping.
Okay.
The most for relay cropping is seeding Italian ryegrass under barley for harvest for grain and grazing it afterwards, or Italian rye behind an oat green feed crop. Cut it and then it grows for fall grazing.
Okay. We have a beef producer who is who doesn't he's more traditional in the way he approaches his operation. So hearing about this, it's interesting and might be a good conversation topic with him. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat for Jed. It's actually from Dr. Kirsten Hannam, who is featuring in the next video. She was asking Jed, how do you deal with those red clover stalks that you mentioned that cause problems with your equipment because they're so rigid and vigorous?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, sorry, I'm having some internet difficulties.
I feel like most of us are in rural locations and we don't have great internet connection.
So you said there was a question. I'm sorry, I didn't get any of it.
Oh, no worries. I'll ask it again. Kirsten Hannam was wondering how you deal with the red clover stalks that you mentioned cause problems with your equipment.
Well, the first year I tried to plow them because I was always under the impression that plowing in a cover crop was the best way to do it when you don't have animals. But I couldn't get a plow through it. It was over the hood in the big tractor and it would just tangle up. So I tried disking it and that worked marginally well, but my disc was too light. So that year I drove back and forth on the field, just moving hay around without being able to get down the soil very much. It did work out in the end. In the spring, it was beautiful soil with a mulch layer on top. It was almost like it was crimped. But now I have a heavier disc and that does the job well.
Excellent.
Sorry, can I just tag in on that? How when you first tried plowing, was the crop standing up or had it laid over due to, I think you mentioned it laid over in heavy rains?
Well, the sweet clover was up. It was probably 10 feet tall and size of your thumb. And the red clover had lodged multiple times. It was probably 8 or 10 feet long, but it was 3 feet tall.
Gotcha.
And going in several directions. So it was still, waist high in the field, but even with a high clearance plow, if you had a good plow, maybe with coulters on it, and you could roll it ahead of it and then cut it, I think you could do it. But for my inferior equipment, it proved to be more than I could do. Gotcha.
Okay, thanks.
And then a question for Jolene, also from Kirsten, the curious one. She is curious if the cows eat the below ground brassica parts as well as the above ground.
They will if they manage to pull them out. When the ground gets quite frozen in the winter, they're unable to pull the bulbs out. But if we are grazing something during the summer and they can pull the turnip bulbs out, they definitely do eat them.
Nice. I have a question for you, Jolene. Did the sunflowers manage to bloom this year? I remember you saying that, yes, so you had a field of sunflowers for a few days?
It's really pretty.
Okay, lovely. I'm also wondering how it went this year in terms of, it was also a dry year for you. And when I was there in July, it was very dry and lots of smoke for fires. Did you, what sort of date did you end up turning it in? Oh, not turning it in, but turning it into swaths, I guess. Usually you try to make to mid-October, is that right?
So we cut it the end of August, and then we turned the cows out into swath grazing in October, because we did have some Italian ryegrass growing underneath some of our barley stands. So we moved the cows from perennial pasture because it was getting pretty tired with the dry, and put them on Italian rye before the swaths. We would have had to go out earlier if we didn't have that Italian ryegrass.
Oh, that's lucky. Okay, excellent. And then you were telling me, and just to let everyone else know, that you managed to have the cows in the swaths until mid-February. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we swath graze from October to the start of February. We did take 5 or 6 days off the end of January. We went from -48 to plus, I don't know, 12, I think it was, with the wind. So, and no freezing overnight. So the cows got pulled off of swath grazing because it can get muddy with that as the frost starts to leave that top part of the ground. So we pulled them off, put them on sod pasture, fed them hay for 5 or 6 days, and then turned them back out once it froze again.
Okay. Just had to jump into some emergency management, I guess, when the weather goes extreme. Yeah.
It is important with some of this stuff to have a plan B. And so, even though we plant enough swath grazing to get us into February each year, we do really, really strive to have enough hay put up that if something happened, we had to start feeding around Christmas time, we would have enough feed.
Got it.
Can I ask a question, Jolene?
For sure.
Do you know the spacing of the swaths? Like, are you cutting it with a 40-foot swather or a 20-foot?
No, we're doing a 20 foot.
20 feet between. Okay.
Yeah. And the swath itself is quite a wide windrow. We definitely do end up, especially when we have deeper snow, with the material and the manure really being concentrated in the windrows. This year, with a more open winter without much of any snow, that gets spread across the field quite well.
Oh, thank you.
Jed, how is your alfalfa that was seeded in the spring of last year seeded in the oat crop? How is that now doing this year, considering everything it went through?
It's small and stunted, but it's alive from what I can tell so far.
Okay.
So I'm hoping for some rain on it. For sure.
And are you going to choose sweet clover as your other interseeded crop because of the dry weather? Or?
Sweet clover is one that I like for a cover crop to plow in. Usually I put alfalfa down when I'm going to hay it, so that it takes a couple years of hay, and then sweet clover is a biennial, so it's done after it blooms. It doesn't come back and cause you any grief. But yes, underseeding those two has become my favorite.
Okay. Does anybody have any more questions for Jolene or Jed before we move on to the next video? Okay. Excellent. Thank you to both of you. I will take you off the spotlight so you're not right in everyone's view there. And then without further ado, I will start the next video, which was filmed in the South Okanagan, and 2 different locations. And one was at the Summerland Research and Development Center with Dr. Kirsten Hannam, and she's doing some trials around tree fruit mulch versus bare strip versus a cover of woolly thyme under the trees. For various different reasons. I won't go into detail because there's a video to explain it all. That is the first part of the video. And then the second part, we visited Kalala Organic Estate Winery with Karnail, Singh, Sidhu, and he was trialing this year a cover crop / cash crop in between his grapevines of chickpeas. So it was for harvesting, but also to see what it might do for the soil as a nitrogen fixer, among other things. And it was part of the BC Living Labs program as well. And so all kinds of different things were being measured along the way. So let me get that video started. There are some interesting things going on in the South Okanagan around cover cropping. The main crops grown in the region are tree fruit and grapes. Selecting an appropriate cover crop can prove challenging due to the region's low rainfall levels and the limited water holding capacity of the predominantly silty and sandy soils. Additionally, these soils tend to have low organic matter. But despite these challenges, there are some interesting trials underway in the area to address these issues. At Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's Summerland Research and Development Centre in Summerland, BC, Dr. Kirsten Hannam is exploring various soil cover management practices within tree fruit production. As part of the trial, she is experimenting with woolly thyme as a ground cover to support the goals of increasing soil organic carbon, water and nutrient retention, and possible carbon capture.
My name is Kirsten Hannam. I'm a research scientist at the Summerland Research and Development Centre. I work for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada here in Summerland, BC. We planted this trial in 2020. One of the main purposes of this trial is to explore various soil management practices that could be used to increase the amount of soil organic carbon underneath the trees. Typically, that area underneath the trees is maintained vegetation free through applications of herbicide. And we found that through long-term maintenance of plant-free soil, we get a depletion of soil organic carbon. And we realized that this area of an orchard is really prime for increasing soil organic carbon. We want to increase soil organic carbon because it helps improve soil health. It also helps improve a soil's ability to hold on to water and nutrients. And we've also identified increased soil organic carbon as a great tool for climate change mitigation. When carbon increases in the soil, that carbon is prevented from moving immediately back into the atmosphere, and carbon dioxide is one of the main greenhouse gases responsible for climate change. So we're exploring practices that could be applied underneath the tree to increase soil organic carbon, but we want to also find practices that are effective in increasing soil organic carbon while also using water and nutrients efficiently so that they don't compromise the fruit quality and yield of the tree. We have 3 main soil amendment treatments in this trial. The control treatment is the conventional practice of maintaining the soil surface plant-free through occasional applications of herbicide. And then we're comparing the amount of soil organic carbon and water use in 2 other soil amendment treatments. One of these is a wood chip mulch treatment as a means of suppressing weed germination and improving water use efficiency. And the third treatment is a woolly thyme cover crop. We're using it as a green mulch. So we chose this woolly thyme because we believe it's fairly water and nutrient use efficient, and it spreads across the soil surface and reduces evaporation from the soil surface. I was looking for a variety or a species that could be planted under the trees, that wouldn't climb up the trees, that wouldn't be highly competitive for nutrients and water, and wouldn't harbor a lot of rodents and other pests that might compromise the health of the trees. I think the 3 soil amendment treatments show some pretty interesting differences just based on pure observation. So the bare soil treatment does need frequent management for weeds. The soil surface does get a kind of a very hard crust on the surface over time, which can be quite difficult to break through. The wood chip mulch tends to get fewer weeds growing on it, and it definitely helps the soil stay moist. We have observed, however, that the tree roots tend to grow along that interface between the mulch and the mineral soil, and we're curious what implications that has for water access for those tree roots. By contrast, the woolly thyme can be tricky to establish at first. We didn't manage to find woolly thyme seed to establish it, so we planted plugs. And because this is a conventional orchard, we still couldn't use herbicide to suppress the weeds, so we had to visit the orchard 3 or 4 times through the year to hand remove the weeds. So that can be a hassle for someone who's managing a large orchard, because it can take quite a bit of manpower to maintain it weed-free while it's getting established. The need to hand weed is becoming less frequent as the woolly thyme forms a continuous mat over the soil surface. But unlike the wood chip mulch, it appears that woolly thyme green mulch doesn't cause a redistribution of the tree roots. The tree roots still grow deep the way they would in the conventional or bare soil treatment. And at the same time, there does appear to be a small reduction in water use requirements for irrigation with the woolly thyme compared to the control treatments. Here we're looking at a hole that I've dug underneath the woolly thyme, and you can see the tree roots, unlike in the wood chip mulch, grow deep down into the soil, seeking out soil moisture. You can tell the soil's damper down at the bottom of the hole where the soil is a darker color, and that's where you see lots of roots growing. I can also show you the woolly thyme itself has really shallow roots. They're very fine and fibrous, and they just stay near the soil surface. Our qualitative assessment of the woolly thyme seems to suggest that woolly thyme is really promising as a cover crop or green mulch in orchards. There are several properties we like about woolly thyme. It doesn't require a lot of water or nutrients, and in fact seems to prefer not being directly irrigated. You can walk on it, you don't need to mow it. It produces a really lovely purple carpet of flowers that the bees seem to like. It doesn't climb up and around the stems of the trees, so it doesn't shade them. It's very tolerant to lots of direct sun. Woolly thyme is a perennial, and it appears to be very winter hardy. We haven't had any winter dieback of any kind. And if you do get patches here and there, it's easy to transplant a little bit from one chunk to another place. So once you've got it established, it seems pretty easy to maintain. So I've dug a hole here at the base of a tree in a treatment that we're maintaining conventionally. Our conventional treatment is soil surface maintained weed-free through occasional applications of herbicide through the growing season. I'd like to show you 2 things. First, these pieces came right from the soil surface, and you can see that there's a really distinct crust that develops when there's no plant cover. And this crust isn't ideal because it prevents water from easily percolating into the soil, either as rain or irrigation, which is unfortunate because these trees need irrigation to stay productive. Another interesting thing to see is that these roots have started to grow nice and deep down into the soil. And they're growing into the part of the soil that's slightly more moist, so that they can access water. So as climate change falls upon us, drought restrictions become increasingly likely. And if we have soil management practices that we can use to help us be more resilient to drought or extremes in water availability and heat, we want to find those treatments. So we're looking to see how the trees respond. If we turn the water off, how quickly do those trees become drought stressed? And does woolly thyme or a bulk mulch help those trees resist water stress through time?
We also visited Karnail Singh Sidhu at his Kalala Organic Estate Winery in West Kelowna, BC. Not only has Karnail been involved in a multi-year cover cropping study with researchers at the Summerland Research and Development Centre, he has also been trying a few innovative practices of his own.
My name is Karnail Singh Sidhu. Yeah, we are running, it's called Kalala Agriculture Limited. It's all certified organic vineyard, and we also have certified organic apples here. We start making wine in 2006, and we opened to public in 2008. A few years back, I have a fellow from Santa Lucia. He scouted through the vineyard, and he find 5 different fungi on the cover crop, which he said it feed on the powdery mildew. So technically that's controlling the powdery mildew than having problems. I truly believe actually nature takes care of things. When we start interfering with nature, that's the problem start.
As much as Karnail truly believes that nature has a handle on things, and the less we interfere, the better off the crop is, he has recently been involved in some cover cropping trials conducted by Dr. Mehdi Sharifi, an Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada research scientist. Dr. Sharifi conducted a 5-year study examining 3 different alleyway cover crop mixes and 3 different undervine mixes, measuring biomass, weed suppression, and carbon and nitrogen accumulation. Karnail shares his observations of the trials.
One thing I really noticed is that where we have growing the cover crop under vine, they fairly control the other plants. And like lentils, they are not high growing, they don't go into canopy, but they also some other plants, so they kind of controlling them. And the crops growing their vegetation, it helps to control us disease and insect because it hosts lots of beneficials on it. They do also add some nitrogen to the ground. Because when you pick a cover crop, you have to think lots of things. Does it really suitable to plant in vineyard? Because vineyard don't need too much water. If a cover crop needs lots of water, then it's not going to work. So you have to find a cover crop which will be suitable for both. So it's easy to do. Otherwise, it will be uphill battle if you start a cover crop which needs lots of water. The vineyard don't need lots of water, or you cannot water in certain time of year the vineyard, then it will be a problem.
Karnail is always thinking about different ways to do things, and this is where he decided to trial planting a cover crop that would not only benefit his soil and plants, but could also benefit his income. He is experimenting with cover crops that can double as a cash crop to potentially have some of the unused land between his vine rows work for him on many levels. In the 2023 season, he planted chickpeas in the alleyways of the vineyard to not only reap the benefits of a nitrogen-fixing plant for his grapevines, but to also harvest a crop to eat and sell.
It was a little challenge to seed because we don't have a seeder. That's how we seed it, just with the hand. And with the tractor, we have a cultivator behind the tractor, make a line, then someone seed in those lines. The problem with that, they grow zigzagging, right? That's a little hard to control weed. So in the future, I think we are looking to have a seeder. This year, I know it's not viable what we're doing, but next year we probably do a little bit better. It's like take, I think, 4 or 5 years before we can say, okay, it works or not. It's like experimental stuff, right? There are lots of other things involved in it. How are we going to harvest? We can do there are 2 methods. We can pull it out, which is the easier method to do, pull it out. That I don't get any benefits from it. What I want to do, I want to leave the root in the ground, so I get a benefit from that knot where they absorb the nitrogen and other nutrient. I will cut it here, and that the part I will send to the market if we can sell it as a whole. Because people can use it as a salad, the leaves, and they can use this, and they can cook these. They can take these out and even can eat raw. They taste very good too. And this one is not fully done yet, but you can eat them raw. They taste really good and sweet. Yeah, that's the reason we want to do it. We want to get a benefit, both benefit. One, economic, other, the soil benefit. We want to get, that is economic too, then you don't need to add a nutrient to it. So it's for us, work good. You can sell the part from the top, and the bottom part it help to grow your other crop. It will, where it will go, I'm thinking take into some local fruit stand to see if they can sell it, And I'm thinking talk to Indian grocery store if they're willing to sell it. And otherwise it will go to our own house and my worker's house, wherever we can cook and eat it.
Kalala's chickpea cover crop trial is being monitored by the BC Living Lab project. The Living Lab is monitoring various different aspects of this chickpea trial.
Everyone knows that climate change is a big deal and it's something we've got to get on top of. First of all, we've got to capture more carbon, but also we've got to reduce how much greenhouse gases are leaving our systems, especially agriculture. Agriculture is a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also a huge capacity to store more of them. So this project was started to get farmers on board to change their practices and help them become part of the solution. There's always a gap in agricultural research, right? The scientists do the research, make these recommendations, but sometimes they're not realistic or there's just poor uptake by the farming community. In this case, we wanted to make sure that the farmers were going to be able to do it and it was going to be good for them. Vineyards are an interesting example of agriculture because there's so much land base that doesn't have plants on it, right? You've got the grapevines, but you've got all that space under the grapevines, between the grapevines, especially since viticulture is having such a hard time adapting to this new climate regime. I think it makes a lot of sense for viticulturalists to have secondary crops on their systems. There's the room, it can be good for the system, and it would be good for them to have a secondary source of income. Chickpeas are an interesting choice for Kalala. Interesting in that, like I said, they're good for the soil, which will be good for the ecosystem, but also I think they're a pretty desirable crop. I mean, pulses are becoming mainstream in North American diets. I guarantee they're going to see a big change below ground and hopefully above ground too, in a good way, because plants change the soil and soil changes the environment. So I'm optimistic we're going to see something pretty exciting.
I'm going to put Kirsten and Karnail on spotlight and for anyone to ask them questions, and they are smart enough to have unmuted themselves, I do believe. Does anyone have any questions for either Kirsten or Karnail? I have many, but I'll hold off. Okay, maybe I'll jump in with some of my questions to start with and see if that jigs anyone for some questions. Kirsten, did you notice? I'm really curious about that finding of the mulch treatment and how you discovered it seemed like the roots were really sort of just sticking close to the surface. Did that continue? And did you see any? It may be too soon, really, but did you see differences or issues with nutrient or water uptake?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Sarah. In the video, in the background of a couple shots, you can see a master's student, Sebastian Damon, who used this orchard as a major part of his project. And he was the one who had noticed, oh, there's all these roots up near the surface under the wood chip mulch, and he was concerned it was causing it might make the tree roots more susceptible to drought stress or cold damage in the winter. So a few months after you visited us, we went out and spent a week digging out some tree roots in all the different plots to look at the root distribution. And we found that it's true that especially with one of the rootstocks we used, the wood chip mulch did cause some of the roots to stay up near the surface, but we were relieved to see that there were other roots that had grown down deeper. So thank goodness we hadn't predisposed these trees to like massive drought stress. There were roots up at the top, but they also still did grow deeper as well.
Oh, good. And a decent amount were going deeper as well. So yeah, okay.
They did, yeah. And then Sebastian turned the water off to the entire orchard over
2 different week periods over last summer, and monitored the response of the trees to the different treatments. And he found that the trees, particularly under the bark mulch and sort of intermediate in the woolly thyme, or no, intermediate in the bark mulch and sorry, in the bark mulch in particular, the trees stayed pretty resilient to the water being turned off. They responded the least. And then in the control, it was intermediate. And then in the woolly thyme, there was a slight increase in the rapidity at which the trees started to show signs that they'd noticed the water had been turned off, probably because the woolly thyme is still transpiring a little bit. So they're competing a little bit with the trees. So after a week, the trees under the woolly thyme did start to say, uh-oh, we're noticing that the water is gone much more quickly than under the mulch.
Oh, interesting. That is interesting. How did the woolly thyme fare in the big cold snap? Fine.
Yeah, that's another great question. Just fine. It's
Okay.
really interesting. Even since you visited, the coverage is even more uniform now. And when we come out of the winter, the woolly thyme is all purple. And every year it's gotten us that we thought, oh no, it died. But then, yeah, it turns green very, very quickly. So as spring arrives, the mulch just greens up again and it's happy as anything.
Okay. I could ask all the questions, but I'll give the opportunity if anyone else wants to ask any questions.
Hi, this is Diana, and I'm curious with the bark mulch or the wood chips underneath, if there was a drawing of nitrogen from the soil to support the decomposition of those chips. That was a problem.
Yeah, it's a common concern for us, and we did monitor the nutrient concentrations in the leaves. We collected leaf samples in July for nutrient analysis, and we did find a slight depression in the concentration of nitrogen in the leaves under the bark chip mulch, but it wasn't anything worrying. So it was still well within the range that's recommended for tree fruit nutrition. So there was a small suppression, but not anything that made us worried.
And then what was the comparison to the legumes that were under there? Or, sorry, the woolly thyme.
In the woolly thyme? Yeah, from what I remember, I should have had these numbers at hand, but from what I remember, the concentration of nitrogen in the control treatment and the woolly thyme was the same. And then under the wood chip mulch was slightly less, but they were all within the recommended range for the tree fruit production guide.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
I have more questions. Shall I continue?
Please do.
I'm curious about using the space between the vines and planting your legumes in there. I'm wondering if the roots of the vines are deep enough that any kind of cultivation that you were doing to manage the legumes, if that actually had an effect on the vines themselves.
I don't think so, because we are planting early weeds, not under the vine, but also the vine roots are fairly deep as compared to those, and but we didn't check that either. That's up to Kirsten to check that or how that interfere with that. But right now we are not planting under canopy. We just planting early weeds, so it's a little far from the root zone. There may be some roots there, but I think at this moment we didn't notice any different.
And I would support Karnail's observation as well. I haven't dug the roots at his vineyard, but at another couple trials, we've dug them out, and they do go so much deeper than what I find in apple and cherry.
They go quite deep, grapefruit, because we use actually to weed control, we always use weed badger, which is quite aggressive on the ground, and we have roots close to the surface, which we cannot use in apples because it will pull out the roots.
Are you, this could be a question for both of you, because Kirsten, you were involved in the chickpea trials at Kalala. I know it's very early in the game, but observations to share around any sort of the different factors that were being measured? It's a big question, but anything that stood out, or does it seem too soon to tell? I mean, I guess in terms of like, you know, nitrogen or fixation, or, I mean, I'm feeling like it's probably too soon to tell that sort of thing. Or carbon sequestration, or maybe not sequestration, but carbon in the soil.
Well, I think, like you say, Sarah, it's probably too soon to tell. However, Karnail and I were looking at some data, I think it was last week, yeah, it was last week. We had collected samples last summer in the dry row where Karnail seeded the chickpeas, as well as under his vines. And in a typical orchard, you often see the soil under the vines has really low concentrations of organic carbon, just like I mentioned in the orchards, because typically there's no vegetation beside the vines. Whereas in the system that Karnail has, where there's lots of plants growing under his vines, he doesn't see that depletion of organic carbon under his vines. So it just shows in general in his orchard, he's because he has so much vegetation growing over the soil surface, that he's not depleting the soil under his vines. So it's not related to the living lab, but it was a nice thing to see.
No, that's
great finding.
As I told you in that day, because when we took over the vineyard, it had nothing growing, and I was so sad for a few years until it started growing. And we don't do actually, people call it weed control, we call them other plants, but we don't do weed control too many times in a year. I do weed control before harvesting because sometimes they grow into the canopy, otherwise I let them grow as much as they can, because it helps us to control insect and fungus. So that's why we started more of that practice, since we find those 5 fungus in vineyard, and we stopped doing that. I used to do 2 to 3 times a year. Now we do only once a year. And my wife always a little bit upset with me because close to wineries. Oh, that don't look nice. I said, people need to change their eyes. That's all it is. So
there's neat and then there's functional, I guess.
Well, they have to look differently.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have any more questions? I'm going to ask a last couple of quick questions. Karnail, where did you end up selling the crop? Did you sell the crop or did you eat it?
No, we didn't sell it. We eat it. They taste very good. They taste way better than what we buy from the store. So we end up harvesting all of ourselves, and we take the seed out from the pods. But I also give the last pod to other people so they can take the seed out. So we distribute in the family and friend, and that's what we did. But they do taste very good. I still have some in my freezer.
Excellent. And then are you investing in a seeder this year to do the same thing, or?
We did have a seeder this year, which we did seed the cover crop. We seed 3 different ones. We seed green chickpeas and French lentil, French green lentil, and then chickpeas. Only one thing didn't work is chickpeas didn't grow as well as other two. They're coming out of I saw today, they're still coming out a little bit, but they're way behind than other two.
This is already seeded for this year, these three. Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay.
No, I want to see if we can harvest 2-3 times a year, because last time it take only 47 days from seeding to the harvest.
Right.
So it's more like still learning. It will take time. Also, I think in the future, I'm going to seed some more in later once they start growing. And I want to see if we scatter the seeding, then we can do harvest, so everything not ripe at the same time.
Right.
We don't have enough people to do the work.
Right. Okay. Oh, that's great. I have a final question for Kirsten for the tree fruit trial. Overall, is there any sort of observations that you're seeing that stand out that you want to share?
Well, I think we have more work to do to be confident in the ins and outs of both the bark mulch and the woolly thyme. The student working on the project, Sebastian, presented his results at the Southern Interior Hort Show in February, and there was a lot of interest from growers, but they still wanted to know questions that, the researcher, just hadn't occurred to me, which is why I think it's so great that we talk to farmers. So they wanted to know things like, what does the wood chip mulch versus the control versus the woolly thyme, what's the effect on the canopy temperature? And this is the first year that we're getting fruit. The orchard is finally old enough. So we're going to rig up some sensors so that we can answer that question. And they were also curious about whether the flowering of the woolly thyme competes with the flowers for the apples in terms of pollination. So we have an entomologist who's come on board to look at that. So there's still a lot more questions that in talking to growers, we realize, if this is ever going to be considered in real life, then we have some more work to do to talk to farmers and find out what other questions or concerns they might have.
Excellent. So interesting. Okay, thank you. Last chance for questions. Otherwise, we'll move on to our final video. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, Kirsten and Karnail, for participating in this, but the larger project. Okay, I will take you two off of Spotlight, and then I'll get started on the next video and give a little bit of an introduction to that. The third and final video was shot in the Lower Mainland as the other region of the province that we wanted to cover. My intention originally with the video series was each of the three different regions, I would sort of choose the two larger commodities and sort of highlight cover cropping practices in those, which I did do in the other two regions. But in the Lower Mainland, I really just stuck to dairy. My intention was to work within the berry industry as well. Logistically, it just didn't work out for various different reasons. But I did film the practice of relay cropping in corn silage for dairy at Holberg Farm. They were very gracious to have me along and tell me a little bit about the practice, how it's been going for them. I think it's they're only in their first few years of trialing it. But I will let the video speak for itself. And then we have Alex Schwichtenberg from Holberg Farm to answer questions afterwards as well. So let me get that one started.
On the Organic BC cover cropping tour of British Columbia, we stopped in at Holberg Farms, located in Agassiz, a small dairy farming community in the Fraser Valley. Dairy farming is one of the prime commodities in the Lower Mainland, and there is an interesting cover cropping system farmers are adopting that has both environmental and economic benefits to the producers. Relay cropping is gaining traction as a valid practice to build soil health, help with nutrient leaching, all the while providing the cattle with a nutritious feed. It is the practice of seeding an Italian ryegrass cover or relay crop within a corn crop. Once the corn is harvested in the fall for corn silage for the cattle, the Italian ryegrass takes over and itself is harvested the following spring as a feed silage for the cattle.
My name's Alex Schwichtenberg.
And I'm Holberg Schwichtenberg, and together with my wife Catherine and Alex and 2 other employees, we farm in Agassiz, BC. We're a dairy farm. We milk between 130 and 160 Holsteins.
We farm roughly 180 acres split down the middle between grass and corn.
Because we were a rotational grazing farm for many, many years, we never grew corn. And in 1986, the herd had expanded. Getting the animals to and from pasture, as you have a larger herd, it becomes more and more with the weather, the wet weather and stuff. So we decided to go to confined housing and growing corn. So in 1986, we had our first corn crop, 40 acres. And my father was always a huge proponent of the cover crop program, especially if you've ever been in Agassiz October, November with the winds. It's very discouraging to see your topsoil leaving in the form of a large dust cloud heading towards Vancouver. So we've always been strong proponents of the cover crop. So we traditionally just planted the fall rye, and then it was a fall rye together with the winter wheat. But also in the early years, it was something we simply plowed under. It was not part of our feeding program. When you're victim to the wind and weather, sometimes it gets a bit complicated or gets a bit tight for time to get your cover crop in the fall, especially if your spring planting didn't go as early. So we were looking for something that covered us off a bit.
Yeah, about 3 years ago, my dad saw these phenomenal cover crops at the UBC Research Station, so he stopped on by and asked a few questions and ran into Gary Tilford, was it? Gary came by the farm and he was telling us about the interseeding and about the planting the cover crops between the corn rows, and yeah, he got really interested in it because it saves a lot of time in the fall and it looks like a phenomenal cover crop. So we gave that a shot about 3 years ago. You can see behind me. We've been doing it ever since. Had a few ups and downs, but I think for the most part it's worked really well, and especially this year with irrigation and a good growing season, we're really excited to see what it could bring in spring. About the 6-leaf stage, we actually drive through the cornfield, seeding the grass, Italian rye in this case, between the corn rows.
And it's not broadcast, it's actually drilled into the ground. And a couple of things, that you've now got your cover crop planted, and secondly, in the fall, when you harvest your corn, you actually have an actively growing cover crop. So your manure application, you cover off the bases by saying, I actually have an actively growing crop, and it's one less work passage that you have to do in the fall because your cover crop is already in the ground.
It's growing between the corn now, and then once the corn shades over, it should stop growing, and then it shouldn't really start growing again until spring.
And it does take a bit of a beating when you harvest, right? You got the big trucks going through, and it does get then a light coating of manure, maybe 5,000 gallons an acre in the fall. And then, yeah, in the spring, you then fertilize again or put manure on it. And again, when winter does play a role, temperatures and stuff, but it's actually quite resilient. And even after the first year, we were quite pleasantly surprised at the results. And we've also found that despite that you're interseeding in between the corn rows, there's very actually debris and stuff and it's not like the corn stubble comes through again. There's not much of it there. So if it all works out, we're happy campers, but we're really only year 3, and yeah, talk to us again in 10 years.
After some good spring growth, the Italian rye relay crop is harvested and made into silage, a nutritionally packed feed for the cows. Holger and Alex talk about when they will pull the relay crop off the field.
Based off of when we planted this, it'll probably be April, May-ish.
Well, end of April.
Going into May, maybe.
But you don't want to leave it too late because you need to get your next corn crop in the ground, right? So again, weather plays a role, and how dry are the fields? Because remember, it's not an established grass seed, so you can't be out there in a mud bath.
Dairy farms generate a lot of manure, and in British Columbia, the Agricultural Environmental Management Code regulates the quantity of manure permitted for spreading on the fields. It also specifies the time frames during which it can be applied. This regulatory effort aims to reduce nutrient leaching into aquifers. The practice of relay cropping can play a significant role in achieving this goal. It allows dairy farmers to apply manure to an already established crop in the fall, ensuring that more nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, will be taken up, compared to spreading it on a recently seeded field.
With the environmental regulations, which I support, I'm actually spreading manure in the fall on an actively growing crop. And again, we all have storage containers. We're not allowed to spread November, December, January, but you know, the huge cost here. And again, you give your crop a bit of a boost, and you are applying manure to a growing crop. We have our grass field, we have this, so we're covered. We can put a light skim everywhere. We're not pounding it on. You're keeping the soil on your land, not in the river, and you got 30 inches of space between each row of corn. Why not do something? Other people are attempting other things. They're planting peas and beans.
They're growing underneath. They don't actually hinder the corn in any way, shape, or form, but it's extra tonnage and extra protein.
No, it's a good nutritional package. And again, with a mixer wagon, you can add if there's any protein shortages or something. It goes into a mix. You got your alfalfa, your straw, so it's not a single component.
Whatever the silage ends up lacking, we just add in after the fact.
Yeah, and they do like it, right? With the price of feed nowadays, anything that you can grow on your own farm, right, really helps your bottom line. And it's so neat, really, say in April, March, and you see this green carpet. It is a nice feeling.
A nice cover crop
Yeah.
is the luscious looking field you'll
Yeah,
see.
right.
My name is Derek Hunt. I work for Agriculture Canada. This is the Agassiz Research and Development Centre. So the work we did with relay cropping, we started several years ago. The idea is it's an extension of cover cropping. With cover cropping, you're up against the problem of can you get your cover crop in early enough in the fall after your main crop? In this case, it's corn silage is what the main crop is in the valley. So we were always faced with this timeline of pushing the planting date of the cover crop after the corn. And often you just didn't get it planted early enough or well enough that didn't provide the winter cover that you would need to a good performing cover crop. Then we came up with the idea of what we call relay cropping, which is really an interseeding. And we tried a mix of species and varieties of crops in silage corn to see if they would work, interseeded into that corn with the idea as soon as the corn is harvested, those crops would be there in the fall to kind of take over the race, so to speak, of soaking up any residual soil nitrate was the initial impetus of it. And then they would have a head start in the fall for doing good ground cover. So we tried many things, such as winter cereals. We did the rye, winter wheat, triticale, looked at lots of different types of grasses, clovers, brassicas, and the ones that worked the best was red clover and Italian ryegrass, or actually at the time it was annual ryegrass. So then we delved into that more and focused mostly on the annual ryegrass because it produced a good cover in the corn, survived in the shade of the corn, and then when the corn was harvested, it was there looking terrible because the harvester had trampled it to the ground, but it could recover from that, and then it provided fall cover. So normally the corn silage is planted anywhere from very late April through May. Ideally it's planted in the first 2 weeks of May, and we wait until the corn is at anywhere from a 3-leaf, which is collar open stage, up to a 6-leaf collar open stage, and then we interseed the relay crop, in this case Italian ryegrass, into that corn, and that is usually anywhere from early June to early July. And then right after that, the canopy of the corn closes in, and under that shade of the canopy, the Italian ryegrass seems to do well. It can tolerate the shade, it can tolerate the competition from the corn, but it sits there in a kind of a not dormant stage, but a very low growing stage. When the corn is harvested in anywhere from early September to the end of September, that relay crop is usually squashed to the ground by the harvesting equipment, but the Italian ryegrass or ryegrasses in general have the ability to pick up from that, and then they'll start growing usually a week to 2 weeks after the corn has been removed, and then they'll grow through to the fall, providing a good ground cover, soaking up excess nitrate from the soil, protecting the soil from wind and water erosion, and then in the spring becoming a feed crop. So that would be the Italian would then be harvested the following spring, usually late April into early May, as a silage crop before rotated back into corn again. Yeah, so the Italian ryegrass, if it's harvested by the dairy farmers for a feed, is usually harvested as silage. So that means it's cut, maybe wilted for a day, or direct cut, and then it goes as an ensiled product to be fed out later in the year. Now the quality of the ryegrass is usually good. It's a good quality, good protein, highly digestible forage feed, and the farmers find that the cows milk better off of that and that the milk fat content goes up. Yeah, so the adoption of these sorts of technologies will depend upon the availability of the equipment, availability of seed, and how it works into an already existing dairy production system. So it takes time to come up with the equipment and the expertise and the knowledge to adopt better management practices, and relay cropping is no different. It's a bit more complicated than say fall planting of a cover crop, where you just put the cover crop in after the corn is harvested. You just need a seed drill, or you can broadcast. With relay cropping, timing is more restricted. You have to go in at a certain stage, like 3-leaf to 6-leaf of the corn, and you need different equipment. So a seed drill would have to be modified to fit between the corn rows, or you have a specialized interseeder. So now the advantages are for the fall and winter is that it provides ground cover. So it protects the soil from surface erosion. That could be from water erosion or wind erosion. It soaks up any kind of surplus nitrate that could be in the soil. And in the spring, it can act as a green manure, so it can be incorporated into the soil as a green manure, or it can be harvested as a crop if it's left till late April, early May.
Alex, I'm going to pop you on Spotlight and see if anyone has any questions for you. If you can unmute, that'd be great. Awesome, you have.
Yep.
Fantastic. As usual, I have plenty of questions, but I'll see if anyone in the audience wants to ask questions before I hijack. Does anyone have any questions about the relay cropping?
Alex, it's Jolene.
Yep.
I was wondering, do you ever graze the Italian rye, or are the fields too soft?
No, we don't graze here. Yeah, it's all harvested for silage.
Okay.
Just with time constraint, like we're getting ready to where we'd start harvesting our cover crops now, provided we can get a break in the weather. And if we were to graze all the acres that we have as Italian ryegrass, we wouldn't get our corn in time. So
100%. And what's your timing for corn harvest in the fall?
It's really kind of dependent on a lot of things, as I'm sure you know. But so like this year we haven't yet harvested, or we haven't yet planted yet. Sorry. Kind of dependent on weather. Late September to October, kind of within that ballpark, depending on when it was planted and how many warm days we've had and whatnot.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a different part of the world up here, so
yeah,
a few different constraints, but we have quite a few beef cattle grazing on Italian rye, and we do have some dairies that are using it, but more for heifer development than or with dry cows.
Well, we do just getting ready in the next hopefully week or two here, we will be harvesting both of our grass fields and our cover crop acres, but they will be put into separate bunks. Not necessarily, we're not a large enough operation to feed 2 separate bunks of grass silage at the same time, but we will keep them separated, and because they do feed so differently. So when we first get going on it, the heifers will get a substantially, or a more of their diet will be made off of the cover crop than the milking cows will be.
Yeah, the protein content on that Italian rye and cover crop is quite phenomenal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question from Kirsten. I was curious what additional equipment or equipment adaptations your farm had to take on to adopt relay cropping on your farm.
So we were quite fortunate in the fact that the Agassiz Research Station is not even 2 kilometers down the road from us, and they are very interested in trying this relay cropping on more places. So we benefit from the use of their tractor and their specifically made interseeder to plant these cover crops in the spring. So we really didn't have to do anything other than buy the grass seed and operate the tractor, which is huge for us too.
Yeah. Interesting.
Is that something that you will continue to be able to have access to for coming years?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, it's a very beneficial thing to us. Especially on our own farm, like I said, we're not of a super huge size, so our corn is custom planted, it's custom harvested. We have our crops are custom sprayed by other people. So our equipment is not set up to drive down corn rows. We don't really do that much seeding. So if we were to have to take that on ourselves, the interseeding, it's quite an expensive undertaking. So hopefully, I sure hope so, that we can continue using the equipment from the research station, or Ag Canada, sorry.
Which begs my next question. You will carry on with the practice of relay cropping. How after your third year in, how do you feel about it? I know there's been challenges but then bouncing back as well, and there's been
it's definitely, like we said in the video, it's had its ups and downs. So the first year we did it, it worked really, really well. There was no issues. It was a healthy crop. It bounced back super quickly after the corn harvest. It fared the winter really well, and it really took off again in the spring. Everything clicked, I guess, that first year. The second year we had a extremely wet spring. Corn was put in the ground late, and then it went from very, very wet to very, very dry. So much so to the point where I actually couldn't tell which rows of corn I'd driven down, because there was no moisture, there was no change of color in the dirt. And then with no water, and at that year we didn't have irrigation, so a very, very small amount of the seed actually germinated, and we ended up disking that under in the springtime instead of cutting it, because there was just nothing there. That was the second year. And then here the third year we did it, we had really high hopes for it. I seeded it just a little bit early, I think, a little bit early, couple days, maybe a week too early. But we did that because we wanted to get the irrigation going on the corn as soon as possible. So like I said, we had really high hopes for it this year, maybe get it in the ground a little bit earlier. It was going to get a little bit more sun. It got water all summer long. Unfortunately, no one's really too sure why. But we had a lot of bare patches in the field. In one field, there's long rows where it just nothing happened. And then in other fields, there was great big circles where nothing happened. So we actually ended up overseeding into that crop again in the fall, because we rely on that cover crop for feed. So we're going to continue trying it, because when it works really, really well. And if we can figure out why it didn't work, then that'd be huge. But I definitely going to try and continue trying it in the future, potentially to a slightly lesser scale, just because it didn't work as well as we'd hoped. But definitely going to keep trying.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And then the frosts sort of affected things in ways that you didn't expect this year, correct? The deep freeze we had in January,
and so it was looking both the interseeded Italian rye that did germinate, it was looking amazing, as was the reseeded or overseeded, just a generic cover crop blend that we put down at a cut rate to try and juice up the field a little bit. They were both looking really, really good. And then coming to January, we had, I think, 4 or 5 days in a row of -18, -20, with no snow cover to protect the grass. And we had a lot of winter kill, and it was looking pretty rough for a long time. And then, probably beginning of March, it started to green up a little bit, and it's bounced back really, really well. It's actually bounced back to the Italian rye fared the weather much better than the reseeded or overseeded cover crop blend. So most of the cover crop blend that we reseeded in the fall died off, and now we only have the Italian rye left. So the winter was a little abnormal. Normally we'd have a little bit of snow to protect things, but this year we didn't. So
Mm-hmm. the mercy of it all. I did have another question. Does anyone else have a question? I keep asking a question.
Sarah, I have one more. It's Jolene again.
Go ahead, Jolene.
Just wondering, have you guys tried anything else with the corn? I know you touched on your video. Of course, you can put anything in a TMR to balance out your energy and protein. But have you guys tried any other plants to put in the pit with the corn to bring up protein and kind of balance it a bit more, or have you only done Italian rye?
No, we haven't. Only Italian rye. We're kind of at the mercy at whoever plants our corn in any given year. So, if we had our own equipment, maybe we could try, I don't know what it's called, but when you plant between the rows with another crop, like peas or something like that. But no, we haven't done any of that.
When you harvest you haven't harvested the rye this year yet? No, that's happening soon. When you harvest it and then you put it in the pit, do you take nutritional, get a nutritional profile at that? Yeah. And then that's what tells you what you want to mix into it to bring up the protein or down. Or
yeah, exactly. I mean, you can add in what you need to, but you are a little bit at the mercy of what the crop is as well. Like you can only do so much. I don't know offhand what our test results were. The last time we had a crop to harvest was 3 years ago. So
yeah, okay.
I'm not sure, but yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Last chance for questions. Anybody from the audience? Alex, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about it all?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
It's when it works well. It's just trying to make everything work at the same time to get the best result. Yeah.
Yeah, and so many factors I think are thrown at people these days too.
Yeah.
That are not always straightforward, as you've discovered. Like, okay, you didn't expect what happened to happen. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to take you off of spotlight. Much appreciated.
Oh, you bet. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for everything, your involvement in all of this. I want to hugely thank all the participants, the people that I filmed, the farms that I visited, the research scientists that I bugged, and because I know what it's like when you're in a busy season and someone wants to stick a camera in your face. And then I also thank you so much for attending tonight as well, because that is another thing for you to do in your busy schedules. Thank you to everyone in the audience for participating and coming. I really appreciate that. I've put in the chat where you can find the videos. They're not actually technically released yet. They're being released one a week, starting tomorrow. And they will be up on the Organic BC website at organicbc.org/videos. There's previous video series that we've produced there as well. They'll also be up on the BC Climate Agri-Solutions Fund website as well, which I've put in the chat too. It'll also be posted around social media. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to get in contact with me. My email is, I'll put it in the chat as well, but it's events@organicbc.org. And yeah, final chance for any comments or questions, but otherwise, a huge thank you to everybody. I have something. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your help too.
Thank you. Thanks,
thanks, Sarah. That was good.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
No problem. Thank you all.
Good.
Okay, have a great evening, everyone. I'm just putting my email in the chat. And again, yeah, huge heartfelt thank you to all the participants. Yeah. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.